Hello there. Welcome to the Light Story Club. Settle in and find a comfy spot to relax. Before we get to the story, I would love to know your favorite myths and monsters. Comment where in the world you are and let's begin the story. Whispers of the Grove, the childhood of Lysithea, goddess of forgotten things. I was born from silence. Not the cold, suffocating silence of a void, but the warm hush that settles over a forest just before dawn, when dew still clings to moss and the birds have yet to remember their songs. My first memory is not of light or form, but of sound, a soft rustle, like 1,000 pages turning, and the sigh of the trees exhaling stories into the wind. They say I am the daughter of Mnemosyne, titan of memory, and some forgotten river god whose name has long since vanished from the marble records. Fitting, perhaps, that I became the goddess of things people forget, lost dreams, faded lullabies, the smell of someone who no longer visits your mind. But as a child, I didn't know what I was. I simply was. My earliest days were spent in the grove of whispering roots, a hidden fold in the world nestled between realms. Mortal seasons did not touch it, time moved differently there. The trees were impossibly tall, their bark etched with the languages of civilizations long buried. The air shimmered with memory, not of moments, but of emotions, impressions. You could walk under a branch and suddenly feel the ache of someone's first heartbreak, or the giddy wonder of a child seeing snow. I lived in a cottage made of twisted vines and woven light. My caretakers were the sylphines, spirit-laced beings who spoke in chimes and cared for me like older sisters. They smelled of sap and wind and sang to the moon. They never told me I was divine. To them, I was simply Lysithea, a curious girl with wild curls and too many questions. At night, when sleep tugged at my lashes, I would lie under the roof of stars, listening to the grove murmur stories. The trees knew everything that had ever been forgotten. Each leaf bore a secret, each root clutched a dream. Sometimes, if I was very still, I could hear the name of a forgotten god or the laughter of a lost friend. I asked one of the sylphines once, "Why does no one remember these things?" She only smiled. "Because, little one, not everything is meant to last. That's why the world needs you." That puzzled me. What could I possibly do? I was just a girl who sang to moths and played with shadows. I collected trinkets dropped between worlds. Buttons from coats never found, fragments of songs half sung, the scent of a mother's perfume long after she passed. I didn't know it then, but even my play had meaning. I was weaving memory into place, keeping the forgotten from vanishing completely. One day, a wind from the mortal world found its way into our grove. It carried a scent I did not recognize, salt and sorrow. I followed it through the trees, over roots older than Olympus, until I found a child sitting on a stone. He was mortal, and he was weeping. His tears left no mark on the forest floor, but his grief echoed through every leaf. I had never seen a mortal before. I was not supposed to. But the grove had allowed him in, and that meant something. I sat beside him without a word. He glanced at me, startled. "Are you real?" he whispered. I nodded. "I lost my sister," he said. "She's gone. No one remembers her name but me." Something in me stirred. A power I hadn't known was mine. I reached out, touching his hand. In that instant, I felt the shape of his sister's laughter, the warmth of her hands, the echo of her name in his bones. "Don't worry," I said. "I'll remember her, too." He blinked, then smiled, a small, trembling thing. He faded then, like mist in morning light. Back to his world. Back to forgetting. But I kept her memory, pressed it into a bluebell. Let it grow roots in the grove. And when the wind passed through again, her name whispered like a secret through the trees. That was the day I began to understand what I was. I was not meant to be seen. I was meant to remember. There are places even the gods forget. One such place lay deep within the grove of whispering roots, beyond the veil of branches that swayed not with the wind, but with memory itself. It was a hollow where the sun never reached, and yet it was never dark. Bioluminescent spores drifted lazily through the air, and glowing mushrooms clung to the bark like sleeping fireflies. This was the Hollow of Lanterns. It was my favorite place. Here, forgotten memories took on form, not as words or echoes, but as light. Each tiny lantern held the flicker of a moment no one else remembered, a bedtime story once told every night, now gone, a dream of a house by the sea, sketched and lost, a vow whispered at the edge of a battlefield, unheard by all but the wind. I used to sit cross-legged among the glowing fungi, watching them float and drift, each a firefly of something someone once loved. They called to me, not loudly, but like a tug at the edge of thought. I could hold them. I could listen. And when I did, the memory within would play in silence, like shadows on water. A dancer twirling barefoot through snow. A grandmother's lullaby, sung in a language that no longer lived. These weren't just remnants. They were gifts. I began to care for the hollow, gently nudging the little lanterns when they floated too low, whispering lullabies so they wouldn't fade. The sylphines told me I was the only one they trusted to tend this part of the grove. "You're not just the goddess of forgotten things, Lysithea," one said, draping her translucent hand on my shoulder. "You're the one who chooses what must be kept safe." It was strange, to have a purpose I hadn't asked for. I didn't know how to carry it, not yet. I still felt like a girl, too small to hold such weight. One dusk, while I was tending to a fading lantern, a flicker of a once-promised love, I felt something shift. A new lantern drifted in. That wasn't unusual, but this one pulsed. It blinked with urgency, like it didn't want to be here. That was impossible. Nothing ever came here unless it was truly forgotten. Yet here it was, golden red, like the last breath of a candle. I cupped it in my hands, feeling it tremble. And then I saw her. A mortal girl, maybe 12 years old, standing alone in the middle of a schoolyard. Her eyes were puffy from crying, her backpack half-zipped. Around her, laughter. Cruel. Excluding. Her hands clenched. Her voice silent, not because she couldn't speak, but because no one listened. And then, nothing. The memory broke. The lantern dimmed. I stared at it, stunned. This was no long-lost past. It had just happened. The memory hadn't even settled. Someone had been forgotten. While they were still there. That broke something inside me. I rushed to the sylphines, the little lantern clutched to my chest. "She's not supposed to be here," I said. "She still exists. She's still living." The sylphines exchanged glances, sharp, silent glances that held entire conversations. Finally, one stepped forward. "Sometimes," she said gently, "people are forgotten long before they die." I didn't understand. Not really. I was too young in God years to grasp the depth of human loneliness. "But we can't let this fade," I insisted. She's still trying." They nodded solemnly. "Then give her something back." That night, I did something I wasn't sure I was allowed to do. I took the lantern and placed it beneath a leaf of the moonfern tree, the only plant in the grove that grew memories into seeds. I hummed a song as old as starlight, and as I sang, the lantern melted into the soil. 3 days later, A tiny sprout emerged. Pale blue. Quiet. And somewhere, far away in the mortal realm, a girl woke up remembering the feeling of being held though no one had touched her. She remembered a voice saying, "You matter," though no one had spoken. She went to school that day, and though no one noticed, she didn't cry when they laughed. She remembered something warm inside her chest. It was enough. That was the first time I truly intervened. The first time I realized I could do more than keep the forgotten. I could plant them. Let them grow back into the world as whispers, nudges, dreams. The hollow of lanterns became a garden after that. I started planting more. With each one, a ripple spread into the human world, small, invisible kindnesses. A forgotten melody that gave comfort. A half-remembered face in a dream that reminded someone they were loved. The sylphines began to look at me differently, not just as a child of memory, but as something new, something blooming. There are some nights even the grove cannot soften. It began with the scent of burnt paper. I awoke in my vine-cocooned bed to a strange hush. The wind had stilled. The stars blinked like they were trying not to cry. And the moon, a dear friend who always watched over me, seemed unusually distant. I crept outside, my bare feet brushing the moss that usually hummed softly beneath me. Tonight, it was silent. Then I saw it. The grove had lost a tree. Not fallen. Not uprooted. Gone. In its place was a hollow patch of darkness that pulsed faintly, like the ghost of a heartbeat. The tree had been ancient, so old its roots whispered in dead languages. It had held memories of empires and orphans, lullabies from centuries gone. Now, nothing. I sank to my knees. I didn't know I could grieve something I had never touched. But I did. The tears came like rain after a drought, slow, at first, then flooding. The sylphines found me there, curled into the earth, my sobs soaking into the soil. One of them knelt beside me. "The world has forgotten something great," she said. "It happens, sometimes. Too quickly. Too completely. How do you bear it?" I asked. "How do you keep being, knowing things vanish like that?" She didn't answer with words. Instead, she took my hand and pointed to the sky. The moon hung there, silent and steady. "She has watched every loss," the sylphine whispered. "And she still rises." I stared at the moon then, my breath catching. I'd always thought she was watching me. I'd never considered that she, too, was watching over me. Not as a deity, but as a witness. As someone who saw all the things the world forgot, and still offered her light. That night, I began to speak to her. Every dusk, I would sit on a high branch and whisper my thoughts to the moon, my fears, my anger, my questions. And though she never answered, I always felt heard. It's a strange thing, isn't it? Even gods need someone to listen. One morning, I followed a trail of ash. It curled through the grove like ribbon, soft and silvery. It did not belong here. Fire had no place in the land of memory, yet something had breached our edges. I followed it to the woven veil, the barrier of dreaming fog that separated our realm from the mortal one. The ash drifted from beyond. I shouldn't have stepped through, but I was young, curious. And something in the ash called to me like a half-remembered lullaby. I slipped through. The world on the other side was harsher. Its colors were dimmer, its smells more bitter. I arrived on the edge of a battlefield, not one of swords and shields, but of cities and sirens. Smoke twisted through the air, rising from a collapsed home. The ruins wept heat. There, huddled among the debris, were two mortal children. Eyes wide. Faces streaked in soot. Alone. They couldn't see me, not fully. But children are closer to the veils between worlds. One of them looked up as I approached. His lip trembled. His hand tightened around a broken doll. "Did you forget us?" he asked. I had no answer. I knelt beside them, and though they couldn't see my face, I placed my palm on the ground. The memory beneath it bloomed, the scent of cinnamon bread, the warmth of a father's lap, the lull of a bedtime song hummed during blackouts. These weren't my memories, but they needed a keeper. So I took them. I whispered their names into a feather and sent it flying toward the stars. I pressed their laughter into a stone and buried it in the grove. I wove the broken doll into a vine that now sings when touched. The children didn't smile. Not then. But the older one blinked slowly, as if something inside him settled. The world might forget them, but I wouldn't. I returned to the grove with ash in my hair. The sylphines scolded me, but gently. They knew. I was becoming something more than their sheltered little goddess. I had walked among smoke and loss, and I came back changed. I planted the memory of the children near the moonfern tree. That night, the moon shone brighter than she had in weeks. Names are strange creatures. Some cling like burrs to your soul, never letting go. Others slip through the cracks, lost before they've even been spoken twice. I was fascinated by them. Not just what they sounded like, but what they held. A name, I discovered, was more than identity. It was a vessel, a memory, a promise. I kept a book of names. Not one of ink and parchment, no. My book was made of wind and whisper. Each page was a leaf in a tree that only grew when someone was truly forgotten. One day, as I wandered beneath that tree, I noticed something odd. A page had grown too heavy. It drooped like a tired heart. I reached up and touched it. It thrummed. Inside was a name, Oren. No surname. No title. Just Oren. Like a sigh in the rain. The memory attached to the name was blurred, fogged by time. I saw flashes, a hand outstretched toward the stars, laughter that crackled like lightning, eyes the color of storm clouds. A boy. A god. A myth. I couldn't tell, but the name ached. I spoke it aloud. The air stilled. Somewhere in the grove, a root split open. From it rose a figure. Not fully formed, not alive, but not illusion either. A shape made of forgotten rain and shadow. He turned to me. Yes, it was a he, and tilted his head. "Who remembers me?" he asked. "I do," I said. He smiled, slow and soft. "Then I'm not gone." He faded after that, back into the earth. But something lingered. From then on, the tree of names began to hum louder. It bore more pages. People whose names had never been spoken aloud again. I read them each night, whispering them to the stars. It became a ritual. Not to preserve their lives, but to honor them. The sylphines began calling me Keeper of Names. They wove my title into their songs. I felt it settle on my shoulders like a mantle, not heavy, but real. And I carried it gladly. Not all forgetting is sorrowful. There are times when people choose to let go of pain, of regret, of burdens too heavy to carry another day. And so, once every century, the grove would bloom in celebration. We called it the Festival of Dust, a night for shedding. The trees shimmered with silver pollen. The air tasted like the last breath of a good dream. Creatures from the other quiet realms gathered, gloam spirits, dusk moths, and the owl-eyed archivists of the deep library. Even the stars seemed to blink slower, watching us with curiosity. During the festival, I took my place atop the hill of wind bells, a garland of moonlace around my brow. It was my role to collect the dust. Not just any dust, but memory dust, the remnants of what mortals had willingly let go. Broken promises. Farewells spoken too late. Names they chose not to carry anymore. It fell from the sky like snow. Each particle glowed with its own hue, pale blue for forgotten melodies, amber for discarded dreams, and deep violet for loves once fierce, now faded. I gathered them in my hands and breathed them into the grove. The trees absorbed them without pain. They were masters of carrying things people no longer wished to bear. That night, a memory fell at my feet, golden and humming, like a bee in sunlight. I picked it up, and for a moment, I saw a mortal woman standing by a train, waving goodbye. Her shoulders were straight, but her eyes shimmered with loss. She mouthed the words, "It's time to live for myself." She had let go of someone who never returned her love. And yet, it was not a bitter release. It was freedom. I placed that memory in a lantern and set it adrift on the grove's quiet river. The sylphines sang as it floated away, and I sang with them, not of loss, but of lightness. The Festival of Dust was a reminder that forgetting is not always failure. Sometimes, it is mercy. He came to the grove in a dream. A mortal boy, 10 years old perhaps, with hair like smoke and eyes too quiet for his age. He wasn't dead. Not yet. But he stood between waking and sleep, drawn to me by something older than language. He didn't speak at first. He just looked around at the roots, the glowing mushrooms, the tree of names. Then, he opened his mouth and tried to say his own name. Nothing came out. No sound. Not even a breath. I knelt beside him, my hand brushing his shoulder. He flinched. "I can't remember," he said at last. "My name, my voice, my face. It's all fading." I felt the truth in his words. This was no simple forgetting. He was being unremembered bit by bit by the world around him. Neglect, abandonment, silence. They were dissolving him like salt in water. I had to act quickly. I brought him to the hollow of lanterns. I held his hand and asked him to remember anything. A smell, a sound, a moment of joy. His brow furrowed. His lips moved. And then, softly, a note escaped, a single hum, like the beginning of a lullaby. It was enough. A lantern flickered into existence. Small, shaky, but real. I named it Echo and wove it into a wind chime of bonewood, where it would ring each time someone like him began to vanish. I whispered to the boy, "As long as it sings, someone remembers." He smiled then, weakly, and began to fade back into his body. Before he left, I caught a glimpse of his sleeping form alone in a shelter cot, wrapped in 2 large blankets, the world having misplaced him. But now he had a sound, a note that lived in the grove. The next day, the wind chime rang twice. I added a second note to the song. Before he left, I caught a glimpse of his sleeping form alone in a shelter cot, wrapped in 2 large blankets, the world having misplaced him. But now he had a sound, a note that lived in the grove. The next day, the wind chime rang twice. I added a second note to the song. Among the relics of the grove, there was a mirror that did not reflect. It was ancient, older even than my mother, they said. Its frame was carved from obsidian bone, and the glass shimmered with starlight that never settled. For years, I thought it broken, until the day I looked into it during a summer storm. I had been arguing with the sylphines, something about boundaries, about not interfering too much with the mortal world. I was angry. I didn't understand why we had to wait for people to be forgotten completely before we could help. I stormed off, thunder in my wake, and stumbled into the mirror chamber. And when I looked into the glass, I saw nothing. Not my face. Not even shadow. Just a void. It terrified me. I touched the surface. "Why don't you remember me?" The mirror whispered, "Because you don't know yourself yet." Those words sank into me like ice. I sat there for hours, heart aching. Eventually, the mirror began to ripple. Not with an image, but with moments. Little glimpses of who I was becoming. A hand offering a lantern to a lost child. A song hummed to the moon. A name whispered into silence. My reflection wasn't a face. It was deeds. The mirror was never broken. It simply didn't reflect what hadn't yet taken form. It showed true identity, not appearance. And so, I left a piece of myself there, one strand of my silver hair, tied into a ribbon, knotted around the mirror's handle. So that one day, when another lost soul looked into it, they'd find proof someone like them once stood there, too. Not far from the hollow of lanterns, tucked beneath the roots of an old dreaming tree, is a door that wasn't always there. I found it by accident one fog-soaked morning. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat in the earth. The Sylphenes had never spoken of it, and when I asked, they only tilted their heads and whispered, "Some doors open only when you're ready." So I opened it. The library beneath was vast, endless, but it did not contain books. Not the way mortals think of them. Each book was a presence, a breath, a thread of thought wound into silence. They hovered like sleeping birds, pages made of memory and bindings stitched with longing. Some glowed with forgotten languages. Others were completely blank, waiting. And the library read me. When I entered, the walls whispered my name, but not the one I knew, another, older version of it, buried in root and stardust. They called me Leraith, which meant she who gathers echoes. As I walked the aisles, stories bloomed around me, not from my hand, but from my heart. They played in the air like lanterns made of ink, the boy with no voice, the children of smoke, the woman at the train. The library had taken the memories I'd kept safe and turned them into stories. "You are not just a keeper," the air whispered. "You are becoming a weaver." I stayed there for what felt like days, though no time passed. I left with a thread of living parchment wrapped around my wrist. It pulsed with each new memory I tended. Now, whenever I forget who I am or why I do this, I return to the library. I let it read me again. And I remember that stories never truly vanish. They wait to be rewritten. One evening, I couldn't sleep. The grove was quiet, too quiet. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. I wandered past the lanterns, past the tree of names, until I reached the sky pool, the place where starlight dripped into water and rippled out as dreams. It was full of silence. That's where I met him. A figure sat at the edge of the pool, his back to me, cloaked in shadows, crowned with something that might have once been light. He didn't turn when I approached. "You're not from here," I said. "No," he replied. "But I used to be." His voice held the echo of old worlds, faint and hollowed. I sat beside him, unafraid. "Why did you come back?" He dipped his hand into the water, and the stars dimmed. "I am the space between what is remembered and what is lost. I am the pause, the silence between stars, between songs, between words." He turned then, and I saw no face, only a hollow carved gently by sorrow. "Some things don't fade because they're forgotten," he said. "They fade because no one knows what to do with them." I understood. Grief that lingers. Love that's outlived its place. Questions without answers. The pause between knowing and letting go. I can't carry everything, I told him. I'm only one goddess. You were never meant to carry it all, he replied. But you were meant to see it. He placed something in my hand. It looked like a black stone, but when I held it to my ear, it whispered every name I'd never had the courage to keep. It hurt, and it healed. The silence left before dawn, but the stone remains in the grove, nestled beneath a bellflower that rings only when someone is grieving in silence. I visit it often, not to speak, but to listen. I never thought it could happen to me. I was the goddess of forgotten things. I remembered what no one else could. That was my purpose, my gift, my truth. Until the day I forgot myself. It began subtly, misplacing a name I had once whispered nightly, losing a lantern I'd nurtured for decades. The sylphines noticed before I did. They exchanged worried glances, their wings dimming. Lysithea, one finally said, "You are dimming." I laughed, brushing it off. But I began waking in the wrong places. Forgetting how to speak to the moon. One dusk, I looked into the tree of names and found none that sang to me. Not even my own. I panicked. I ran to the library beneath the grove, begging it to read me. But the stories had scattered. The pages trembled, blank. I screamed into the echoing corridors. I am still here. And the grove answered, not with comfort, but with mirrors. They bloomed from the bark and water, showing versions of me laughing, crying, furious, gentle. All of them me. None of them enough to bring my name back. I curled into the roots, heart hollow. That's when the moon descended. She did not speak. She simply hovered above the grove, brighter than I'd ever seen. Her light wrapped around me, not to blind, but to reflect. And in that light, I remembered. Not my name, but my essence. The way it felt to comfort a child. The quiet breath of a memory restored. The warmth of being known by someone, even if only by the stars. And my name returned slowly, like a dawn. Lysithea, Liraith, Whisper Keeper, Echo Weaver. I rose with trembling knees and relit every lantern in the hollow. I carved my name into the bark of the grove, not to be worshipped, but to remind myself, even gods need to be remembered. In the farthest corner of the grove, beyond the sighing reeds and past the veil of willow light, lies a garden where everything grows in reverse. Petals unfurl into buds. Fallen fruit rises to branches. Footprints vanish behind your step. No one knows who planted it. Some say it was a mortal who begged the gods for a second chance. Others say it was the grove's own dream, longing to undo a wound it could not name. But I know the truth now. The garden grows backward because it holds regret. Not the kind that fades quietly in time, but the kind that echoes, loud as thunder in a sealed room. Regret is memory turned inside out. One day, I stepped into the garden with a lantern that had dimmed beyond recognition. No name, no color. Just wait. I knelt in the soil and buried it like a seed. Hours passed, then days. I sang to it, watered it with moonlight, brushed its shape with forgotten lullabies. And then a sprout emerged. But not of light. It was made of possibility. What could have been? A conversation that was never had. A word unsaid. A path unwalked. I wept. Because even regret, when tended gently, could blossom into something soft. A single bloom unfurled, violet and gold. When I touched it, I saw the lantern's story, a man who chose silence instead of apology. A woman who turned away when she should have stayed. A child who wished they had said I love you just once more. I let the bloom fall into my hands and whispered, then say it now. The lantern flared to life. The garden that grows backward reminds me, not everything lost stays buried. Some things return, not as they were, but as they might still become. Not every name in the grove is carved in bark or sealed in stone. Some are written in wind, carried by whispers too fragile to settle, remembered only when someone breathes them with love. These names are the most endangered. I began collecting them out of necessity. They arrived with no lanterns, no artifacts, only echoes. The sound of a lullaby someone used to sing. The feeling of a touch long vanished. A nickname called across a field at dusk. I listened, and I began to write them. Not with pen or chisel, but with thread. I spun their names into ribbons and tied them to the branches of windbell trees. Each time the breeze passed through, it sang their syllables, soft but real. One day, a ribbon came untied and drifted into the stream. I chased it, worried it would be lost. But it didn't sink. It danced on the current. At the bend of the river, I found a girl barefoot, laughing in her sleep beneath a lantern tree. She was dreaming. Her voice carried in the air. Thank you for remembering me. I blinked, and the ribbon curled into her hair. Sometimes, I wonder if the grove lends pieces of itself to the waking world. If people carry its wind in their lungs, even when they don't know my name. So I keep writing in wind. Because a name is not just a word. It is a home. He came as a shadow, yet the grove knew him before I did. Every lantern dimmed as he approached. The air grew still. The water trembled. I stood alone beneath the tree of names when he appeared, a tall figure wrapped in dusk, wearing a crown of shattered stars. He was beautiful and frightening. I thought we lost you, I whispered. I was lost, he said. They stopped speaking my name. My temples fell. My worshippers turned to others. I faded. He looked at me with eyes hollowed by centuries. But someone remembered. I swallowed. Me, a child, he said. She sang my hymn as she fell asleep. Her voice reached even me. He stepped forward. But I do not remember who I was. This was the most fragile kind of forgetting, the divine kind. When gods fade, they do not die. They become question marks in the world's story. I reached for his hand. Let me help. I led him through the grove, showed him the wind ribbons, the reverse garden, the sky pool. We visited the lantern of the boy with no voice and the bellflower of grieving silence. And slowly, gently, he began to glow, not with the fury of a sun, but with the warmth of a candle lit in the dark. He chose a new name, and I carved it into the bark beside mine, because sometimes even gods need to be reborn, not as rulers, but as memories cherished by the gentle. I have walked every path in the grove. I have sung to bones, to wind, to the stars. I have whispered names into still water and coaxed blooms from sorrow. I have failed, and remembered, and become. But the most important place I found was the one within me. It began with a dream. I stood in the heart of the grove, but everything was wrong. The trees were dead. The lanterns shattered. The sky wept ink. I wandered, calling out, but no voice answered. And then, I heard a hum. A single, broken lullaby. The first one I ever sang to a forgotten soul. I followed it. Through darkness, through ache, until I found a door, plain wood, covered in moss. I opened it. Inside was me, a younger version. small, uncertain, with dirt on her knees and stars in her hair. She looked up. "Do you remember yet?" she asked. I wanted to say yes, but instead, I knelt and wrapped my arms around her. "I remember you," I said. "And we became whole." When I woke, the grove was still there. The lanterns still glowed. But everything felt deeper, wider, more true. I was not just the goddess of forgotten things. I was the goddess of remembering that even what's lost is still part of us. The grove is quiet now, but it is never empty. I walk its paths each dusk, leaving ribbons of wind behind me. I listen for your name, and if one night you hear a lullaby in your sleep, soft as silver rain, it's just me, remembering you. Thank you for listening to this light story. If you enjoyed this lovely tale, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Light Story Club will be here for when you want to listen to another chronicle to help you rest. Goodbye for now.